that our second edition is just out, and we would be sharing the link very soon. So in the first edition of our book, we had covered compounding orders from July 16 to December 18. So roughly 1268 orders. In this edition, that is starting from orders starting from Jan 19 till April 20, because after April 20, RBI had stopped publishing orders due to COVID-19 situation. So we have covered around 1050 odd orders. So combined, both editions, there are almost 2300 orders that we have covered. So what I plan to do for the two sessions that I will be taking, the first session today, I will be covering important and significant orders under the notifications except ODI and FDI. And in the next session, I will be covering and focusing only on FDI and ODI contraventions. So I think with this, we can start off with the session. And please ask me any questions anytime that you want. I really want this session to be as interactive as possible. And all along the way, we have also learned quite a few things from analysis of these orders. And I would love to exchange ideas. I would love to know the viewpoints on a lot of orders that we have covered, and I have also put in these slides, and the perspective from other practitioners too. So just to give an introduction,
Sorry, Harshal.
in
Sorry to interrupt you.
yes,
So
yes, Neeraj.
participants can raise their hand, so we can unmute them, and they can put forward their questions to Harshal.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so to give an introduction, in 2016, RBI took a policy decision that they would put out in the public domain all the compounding orders that they would be passing henceforth. So so that does not mean that it never used to pass compounding orders. Before that, it always used to pass compounding orders, but the compounding orders were private. Only the entities who were compounded, so they were privy to the order as well as RBI. And after the issuance of this circular, now anyone and everyone can go to RBI's website and they can view the compounding orders on themselves. They can read them and they can analyze them on their own accord. So till now, there are 2355 orders that have been hosted on RBI website. 5 orders have come in the month of October now. So RBI has started putting up the orders again in both. So combined volume 1 and 2, our books contain 2350 orders, and we have, I think, roughly given detailed analysis of over 150 orders in both books combined, and all the remaining orders we have compiled and put it up in our book for ease of reference, notification wise, and even under that regulation wise. So if you just want to put up any so refer any topic, you can just go and you can refer to the specific regulation. One very important thing, so when we also started with the book project, a lot of people came to us and told us, why are you going ahead with the book project? Because all these compounding orders do not have any precedence value. But one important thing that they miss is that they hold immense guidance value. Not everything is in black and white under FEMA. A lot of stands that RBI takes are not available for knowing in the public domain. So that is how these compounding orders gain more and more significance, because a lot of things, a lot of transactions, how RBI compounds them, whether it gives post facto approval, whether it does not give, how to regularize, whether undue gains comes up in any particular case, how does RBI view that, under what circumstances does it refer the cases to ED. So all these things you can actually come to know from the compounding orders, which are not in black and white in the regulations per se. So that is where the importance of the compounding orders is brought out. See, the compounding orders are not as detailed as any other case law that we know, in income tax, a detailed facts would be given, an analysis would be given, and then a decision would be given. Compounding orders roughly range from 3 to 4 pages to maximum, we have seen, I think, around 10 pages, not more than that, wherein, the facts are very crisp. So therefore, you won't be able to go into detail about, what the entity had done in the past. Obviously, that is for privacy reasons that and the business concern reasons also, that RBI would not want to put the entire facts in the public domain. But at least you will get a gist of what has happened, which contravention has taken place, and how it has been compounded. So therefore, you can actually guide your own clients on how to avoid these kind of contraventions, and if you are caught in the crosshairs, then how to come out of it by payment of compounding fees. So this is as far as the introduction was covered. What I'm going to cover in this presentation are all these regulations, the provisions of the FEMA Act itself, then current account transaction rules, capital account transaction rules, ECB regulations, the erstwhile rupee borrowing regulations, deposit regulations, then regulation notification 9R, which is not 9R, 9, because all these compounding orders relate to earlier notifications. Then foreign currency account notification for receipt and payment, immovable property, LOBO, and export regulation. So someone would obviously naturally come up with the question that why would you study the compounding orders which deal with contraventions under erstwhile notifications? The reason is very simple. Most of the erstwhile notifications and the provisions under the erstwhile notifications have been carried forward to the present notifications. So say for example, if you want to refer to FEMA 9, FEMA 9 provisions, almost all of them have now come in FEMA 9R. So therefore, a contravention that would have taken place under FEMA 9 would still have guidance value as of today, because if any contravention comes up, or if you face any situation under 9R, you can still refer to that compounding order and see how RBI has proceeded in that matter. So that is why all these compounding orders still have guidance value, irrespective of whether the notifications have been revised or not. Now let's deep dive directly into the compounding orders. Starting with the FEMA Act, I will start with the first compounding order. This is of an individual and along with his family members, but I have taken only the compounding order of this particular individual. So this particular individual, what he had done, so he had opened an LRS account outside India, and from that LRS account, he had purchased shares of an Indian company from a Mauritius company. So there is an Indian company whose holding company is in Mauritius. Now what this individual has done, this individual has opened a LRS account in UK, putting funds there. From those funds, it has purchased the shares of the Indian company from the Mauritius holding company. Now at the time of making the remittance, you have to give a declaration under LRS. So this particular individual had made a declaration that he is remitting funds into his LRS account for the purpose of acquiring shares of overseas companies. Now when RBI became aware of this fact, it advised the applicant to unwind the transaction, because this transaction is not permissible and obviously post facto approval also cannot be given. So which regulations are attracted here? Two sections, one is section 3B and one is section 10.6. Section 10.6 is a section wherein you have to make a declaration and you have to use the remitted funds only for that purpose. And section 3B is basically making payment to a non-resident for transactions which are not permitted. So here, who is a non-resident? The non-resident is a transferor, that is a Mauritius holding company. So this individual has made payment to a Mauritius holding company for a non-permitted transaction. So therefore, both these regulations have been attracted. Now, one important thing that one needs to bear in mind is that whenever you are undertaking an LRS transaction, you necessarily have to see that you adhere to the declaration that you would be given. Second, if you cannot adhere to that declaration, there is a way out, there is an alternative, but you have to use the funds only for the purposes which are permitted. So if you are not able to utilize the funds for the declaration that you would have made, you can alternatively use those funds but only towards permitted purposes. Here, he had not used the funds for permitted purposes. There is even a contravention of capital account transaction regulation, because you are allowed to draw forex only for permitted purposes under Schedule 1 for a person resident in India, and he has not adhered to that. Now, one important observation that we came across upon analysis is that when does actually Section 3 come into play? So if one actually reads Section 3, Section 3 starts with a savings clause. What does Section 3 say? Section 3 starts with this: save as otherwise provided in the Act, in the rules, under regulations made thereunder, or with general or special permission of RBI, no person shall A, B, C, D. So what does the saving clause say, and what is the significance? So the savings clause is given so that if a particular regulation already appears, then the contravention would go under that particular regulation and it would not come under Section 3. So therefore here, when a non-resident is transferring the shares, upon transfer of shares, what are the modes of payment that are given under the inbound investment regulations? So as on today, it is manner of reporting and mode of payment regulations which are there. So under that, it has been given that they can receive funds in so and so manner. And if there is a contravention on that count, then that regulation is a regulation which needs to be attracted. So therefore, the question comes up, which is a specific regulation, which is a general regulation. If there is a savings clause, then we would tend to believe that the contravention would go under the specific regulation and not under the general section. Let's go on to the next compounding order, and this is also a very important compounding order. So there is an Indian company which is a group company of a Netherlands company. So what did the Indian company do? What were its business activities? The Indian company was in the business of collecting payments from the customers located in India on behalf of the non-resident merchants. So therefore, non-resident merchants would sell its goods to Indian customers, and the Indian customers, instead of making payment directly to the individual non-resident merchants, they would make payment to this intermediary who's a which is an Indian company, which is Global Collect India Private Limited. And during the course of business, it had collected an amount of 2,60,69,306 during this period, which is Feb 7 to 2010. So whether this is actually allowed or not, this is not allowed. This is where RBI has compounded this contravention under Section 3. What does Section 3 say? So just like Section 3B was making a payment to a non-resident for a non-permitted transaction, Section 3C is receiving a payment by or on behalf of a non-resident, that is a person resident outside India, for a non-permitted transaction. So here the Indian company, so as per RBI, the Indian company is not permitted to accept the payments on behalf of the non-resident merchants, even though it is not collecting the money on its own accord. It has to pass on the payments, and therein obviously it would have received certain remuneration for this activity. Yet RBI has gone ahead and said that this is a contravention of Section 3. Now if we come back to basics, when does Section 3 come up? One is, we saw that when there is a savings clause, and second, we would tend to believe that if a particular settlement of foreign exchange obligation happens in India, that means that the conclusion of the transaction happens in India, the forex payment eventually does not go out of India. So here Global Collect agent may have been acting, or Global Collect India Private Limited may have been acting only as an agent. It is not supposed to keep the money for itself. It is supposed to pass on the payments, and in return it would have got some kind of percentage spread or remuneration or whatever, agency commission in whatever sense. So even under those transactions, the primary doubt comes that whether you can actually apply section 3C, because you are not stopping or ending that transaction in India. The foreign exchange payment is supposed to go outside India, and therefore in your hands at the end of the day it may amount to current account transaction. So therefore this is a poser which I have kept for the participants. So if anybody would like to contribute, I would love to hear their views on this.
Anyone who wants to speak can raise their hand.
Okay, I think I would move on in the absence of any response. Let's go to the next compounding order. So the next compounding order are three individual orders, but I have combined them because the facts are similar. The transaction is one. So what has happened in the facts of these compounding orders is that there are two individuals, Shri Shyam Sundar Periwala and Smita Bimla Devi Beriwala. So these are relatives of the three individuals which have listed here, Shri Binit Beriwala, Uma Beriwala and Shri Vittal Beriwala, in different capacities. For some they are the parent, for some they are the grandparent, for some they are the parents-in-law. So this is the relationship. They are all blood relatives. Now these applicants, so wherever I use the applicants, meaning the compounding applicants. So person who goes for compounding, they are known as applicants. So here the three compounding applicants, they are resident individuals. They had remitted on a cumulative basis, aggregated basis from their three individual accounts, a total amount of 3,35,000 pounds to the overseas joint foreign currency account of these two individuals which are listed here, Shri Shyam Sundar Beriwala and Smita Bimla Devi Beriwala, as a gift. So mind you, the donor, all the three donors are resident individuals. Both the donees are also resident individuals, but the donors are gifting money in the donees foreign currency accounts. So LRS accounts outside India. Okay. So after this has happened, they approached RBI for post facto approval, and obviously RBI didn't give them a post facto approval because this transaction is not permitted. It is very explicit. It is given under the regulations, and they were advised to unwind the transaction by way of bringing back the gift that they had given to the donees. And the gifts were brought back, the amounts were brought back on 5th November 2018. That is after a period of 8 years. So which is a regulation which is attracted here? Here one is section 5. Section 5 is the one which deals with current account transaction. And then there is a master direction on LRS. So there is a separate master direction on LRS wherein different current account transactions, different capital account transactions have been given there, what you can undertake and what you can't. So bits and pieces of notification 3 are also you will find there. Bits and pieces of other regulations also you will find there. So say suppose 20 are regulation 20 of that, and obviously current account transactions also you will find there. So here are certain technical questions which we came across is what is the relevance of section 5? Section 5 is basically drawal of foreign exchange if the transaction is a current account transaction. And second reference which is given here is master direction reference para 7b. Para 7b is expressly states that you are not allowed to gift funds in foreign currency when both persons are in India. Both persons are persons resident in India. Okay. So the important question here is this master direction. So this para 7b of this particular master direction is not appearing anywhere under any of the notifications. So neither in the current account transaction rules it is appearing, neither in the master direction on neither in any other miscellaneous notifications it is appearing. So in that case, can you actually say this master direction has any force of law? So the master direction are issued by RBI, and the specific power that RBI draws is under section 10(4) and under section 11(1). So these are the two sections which give RBI to issue directions to AD banks by way of APDR circular and master direction. So the challenge was made in one of the cases, that is, this is a Bombay High Court case, Krishnaraj Goswami versus RBI, wherein it has been upheld that RBI draws power under these particular sections to issue directions, and that covers master direction also apart from APDR circular. But when you go to the master direction on LRS, see, there are different master directions which are given. Master direction on urban investment, master direction on ECB. In all those master directions, you would find a statement which is given below that this master direction has been issued under section 10(4), read with section 11(1) of RBI Act. But when you go to the master direction on LRS, under this master direction, you would not find such a statement. So in the absence of this statement, can anyone actually claim that this master direction does not have any force of law itself? This is a question which is for the judiciary. We would refrain from answering that, but going by the spirit of the law, I would tend to believe that the master direction should be respected. Now coming to the second question which we came across is, what is the relevance of section 5? See, section 5 would then draw you back to the current account transaction rules. And when you go to the current account transaction rules only contain certain prohibitions or certain limits. So it does not talk about permissible transactions. So a gift transaction is a current account transaction, no doubt about that, because there is no cross-border creation of asset or liability for the same individual. Being a current account transaction, you neither come under schedule 1 to 3 of FEMCAT rules, that is prohibited transactions permission of the central government, or a cap on the LRS, that is $250,000. It does not apply here in any case. So therefore, what is the relevance of section 5 itself here? Why I have brought out these technical points here? One very simple example I want to give you. Notification 263, which was issued in August 2013, that has been applied by RBI for all the cases of individuals who had incorporated a company outside India, or who had purchased a company outside India from other persons. Now RBI has consistently taken that stand that before the issuance of this notification, individuals could never have incorporated companies outside India. Whereas there are certain orders of the FEMA Appellate Tribunal which has held that since there was no prohibition up till and until the issue of this notification 263, this transaction was not covered under FEMA 120, and there is no contravention of FEMA per se. So here you can see the contrasting views of RBI versus the FEMA Appellate Tribunal. So I have listed down these technical arguments. Specifically, if certain case comes up before a FEMA Appellate Tribunal, then these questions of law may be deliberated by the Appellate Tribunal, and we may see certain results which may be in variance with the position adopted by RBI under these compounding orders. That is the sole reason of studying this particular compounding order and bringing out the technical aspects here under. But obviously, otherwise, when you are advising someone, you have to go with the spirit of the law. RBI has mentioned under the master direction, and there is a specific prohibition for gifting between two persons resident in India by way of remittance outside India. So therefore, that is a prohibited transaction. Let's go to the next compounding order. So there are certain peculiar orders which you will find under section 42(1). So this is one such order. If we go to section 42(1), so before we go to the facts of the case, what does section 42(1) talk about? When a person committing a contravention of any provisions of this act, of any rule, direction or order made thereunder, is a company. So if the person committing a contravention is a company, then every person who at the time of contravention was committed, who was in charge of and was responsible for the conduct of the business of the company as well as the company, both shall be deemed to be guilty of the contravention and shall be liable to be proceeded against and punished accordingly. Then there is a provision. So what does 42(1) essentially state? 42(1) essentially states is that at the time when the contravention happened, the person who was in charge of or was responsible to the company for the conduct of its business, that person would also be deemed to be guilty of the contravention. So there are certain peculiar orders where from we have come across certain observations, and then we have done in-depth research on when section 42(1) actually comes into play, because there is no further guidance which is available on section 42(1), and RBI in these specific orders has also not listed specifically why section 42(1) has been compounded. So we'll come to the reasons there. Now let's go to the facts of the case. So here there is one individual who was a director of an Indian company. This Indian company had received certain export orders during the period Jan 08 to July 2011, amounting to an amount of roughly around 6.3 crores. And irrespective of receiving these export remittances, it could not make the exports within the prescribed time limit. Later on, it adjusted the exports against the advances which it had received earlier against the subsequent exports and then squared off the amount. There is also another contravention here. So mind you, all these contraventions are by the company, and this person is only an individual of the company during that period. What does the other contravention concern? The other contravention is about non-realization of export proceeds within the prescribed time period of 9 months, and that is ranging ranging from 2014 to 2018 over a period of 4 years. So one observation that we have here is that section 42(1) is typically invoked when the facts are little muddy. So whenever ED is engaged in a particular matter, so when the matter has been referred to the ED, only in those cases you will find invocation of section 42(1). Now coming to the points of law when section 42(1) actually can be invoked. So here there are certain judicial decisions, so ranging from the Supreme Court to decisions of the High Court to decisions of the Appellate Tribunal itself. So the Supreme Court, okay, so I will give you a background and the basis upon which 42(1) can be invoked. So this term which is there, person who was in charge of and was responsible to the company for the conduct of the business of the company. So this entire phrase which is there, this phrase is also appearing in Negotiable Instruments Act, and this phrase has been interpreted right by the Supreme Court itself in the case of Girdhari Lal Gupta versus D.H. Mehta. Now there is a decision of Bombay High Court which has held that the interpretation of the Supreme Court coming out from that case of this entire phrase, that interpretation can be directly applied to FEMA since both laws are pari materia. The Bombay High Court decision, for your reference if you want, that is Shashank Venkatesh Manohar versus Union of India. And then there are certain other decisions also of FEMA Appellate Tribunal the famous decisions in the case of Jaipur IPL, a lot of foreign exchange contraventions were identified there, and there also there was a question of invocation of section 42(1). So culling out the ratio from all these three decisions, finally one comes to the conclusion that section 42(1) can be invoked, one, only upon the individuals who are having overall control of the day-to-day management of the company. So therefore, if you are, an independent director, say, during that period of time, and you are not aware of the facts, then you cannot be prosecuted under section 42(1). Second, this section can be invoked only when that individual had a knowledge, that individual did not conduct proper due diligence to prevent the contravention, and third, that individual may have had some hidden motive for abatement of this particular contravention, wherein the benefit would have gone to the company or to that individual. So only in these specific circumstances, one, in charge of day-to-day management, second, they would have been in the knowledge of the contravention, or they would have not conducted due diligence even though they would have been aware of the particular transaction, or fourth, there would have been some hidden motive. If either of these three factors are there, only then 42(1) can be invoked. Otherwise, 42(1) cannot be invoked. So these particular orders you would find only after Jan 2019. So therefore, all these section 42(1) orders we have covered in our second edition of the book. Okay. Now coming to current account transaction rules. Yes.
Harshal, I think Hinesh sir has raised hand.
Yes. Yes.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, please.
Yeah, Harshal, Aarti here.
Yes, madam. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Harshal, the case what you said about this export, how are these cases referred to RBI? Like whom? Like does AD Bank refers that these advances are not adjusted, or remittance are not received within 9 months or so?
Yes. So typically, there are certain guidelines where caution listing happens of the
Yeah.
particular exporter. So earlier, caution listing used to happen upon, not setting the bills with a period of 2 years. Now, recently, I think last week itself, certain amendment in those guidelines are coming by way of RBI circular. But once a certain particular caution listing happens and a particular, outstanding is there, which exceeds a reasonable period of time, in those cases, the bank first gives you a show cause and asks you why the matter should not be referred to RBI, and then the matter goes to RBI, and if RBI is not satisfied, then it in turn refers the matter to ED.
Any chances of same being referred in case of export of service, not goods, but for services?
Yeah, so same parameters typically apply. So obviously, in case of services, this 2-year limit of closing the bill and all would not apply.
Yeah.
But typically, so I have a case which I have covered here for considering as deemed DCB. Even after the transaction is considered as deemed DCB and it is not settled for an unreasonable amount of time, in those cases, the bank indeed refers the case to RBI.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Aarti.
Harshal, there's one question in Q&A.
Yes.
Can we go on appeal to the appellate tribunal as a matter of right?
Sorry, as a matter of?
Right. So,
So appeal against the compounding order?
I believe, yes. I think that is what.
Yeah, no. So that appeal route is not given. So if you want to refer, compounding order, different sections, they start from, section 13 and The sections which deal with adjudication and appeal, they start from section 16 to section 19, and they typically only cover adjudication orders. So adjudication order meaning order which is passed by an officer of the ED. They do not cover within its purview the compounding orders. So therefore, the only rate, so the only way that one could challenge these compounding orders is maybe by way of a writ before the High Court, and that is also if the writ is accepted.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll proceed to the next compounding order. This is in case of Jaguar Bilcon, and this is for a current account transaction. Which had been undertaken by Jaguar Bilcon. So here the applicant was building a hotel that is by name of Namaste, and that was a luxury hotel. It had hired various consultants for completion of the project, and there are certain amounts which it had actually remitted to them. The question came up here that once you are in contravention of the amount which is actually allowed by RBI, and beyond which, so I think it's better to give a background of the current account transaction rules. So under current account transaction rules, as you saw, there are 3 schedules: Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3. Schedule 1 is transactions which are prohibited, very simple transactions such as remittance for lottery tickets, etc. Schedule 2 are list certain transactions where central government approval or the respective ministry approval is required. And then there is Schedule 3. Schedule 3 is basically for individuals and non-individuals. Individuals, it is LIS transactions. Non-individuals, it is, so there are certain remittance limits which have been prescribed for certain transactions. So for remittance of consultancy fees for projects, certain limit has been given, and here the limit is $1 million per project. So this applicant had exceeded that limit, and therefore the contravention happened on that count. Now that applicant went for post facto approval, and since the remittance had already made, the service had already been rendered, it was not possible for them to get back the money. So therefore RBI gave them the post facto approval. The relevant regulation is paragraph 2(3) of Schedule 3 of MCAT rules. Now, lot of times, when we actually see this Schedule 3 and for non-individuals, and specifically this point, lot of times a doubt comes whether this limit is per financial year, is it per remedy, or is it per project. So from this compounding order, now it is very clear. In fact, it was very clear in the provision also, but there was a question in a lot of professional circles, what is to be applied. It is per project. Now that project may extend over multiple financial years, but that limit will still remain the same. Okay. You may make remittance to multiple parties, but it is a cumulative limit. Okay. So those are the key takeaways from this compounding order. Okay. Let's go to the next compounding order, that is in case of capital account transaction. So this was by an individual. So this individual had remitted an amount of $271,480, which is in excess of $250,000 limit. Now a lot of times, it happens that the client comes to you, tells them that I want to do an ODI transaction, but I have had made certain transactions under LRS. So whether the ODI transaction would also come under the LRS limit, the answer is certainly yes, that would come under the limit. But a lot of times people have misconceptions that if it is ODI portfolio transaction versus it is proper ODI transaction, sorry, the LRS ODI transaction versus a portfolio transaction, is there a difference between the limits or not? So the answer is no, there is no difference between the limit. The $250,000 limit applies to both LRS ODI also and the portfolio transactions also. So here under the facts, this particular individual was also under the same misconception that the LRS limit does not include the ODI because separately FEMA 120 deals with ODI transactions. At that, so one thing is important to note here, at that point in time, I think PAN linking was not there, and I think we have also come across during the course of providing services, a lot of transactions have actually been undertaken by banks because the banks were ignorant whether the $250,000 limit for a particular individual has been exhausted or not. And a lot of individuals actually when they wanted to facilitate transactions, they used to ignore the advice and they used to go through different banks. Now that route has been totally closed because PAN linking, first PAN linking happens for the ODI, and second, daily reporting of ODI transaction happens on the system. So therefore, even if you go to different AD bankers, they would instantly come to know whether your LRS limit has been exhausted or not. Okay, so these are certain takeaways. So daily reporting has now started since 2018, and one thing which is very important is that so in fact I think last month itself I came to know that in a particular region in India, banks are allowing remittances over and above the 1 million limit. Obviously that is not relating to LRS, but that is relating to the NRI remittance, that is notification 13R. The 1 million per financial USD limit is there. Even as on today, the banks are allowing that. I'm not sure how they are allowing that due to lack of paperwork or otherwise. But one thing is for sure, that if contravention happens in those counts, RBI will ask you for sure to unwind the transaction and bring back the money. And if you have used the money already in a particular current account transaction or a permissible capital account transaction, in that case you would be in a fix from where to arrange the funds. So therefore one should be very careful when approaching these limits. Now with effect from 1st October 2020, the TCS provisions have also come into force on the LRS transactions. Mind you, even though TCS applies on the LRS transaction over and above the LRS remittance that you need to make, that will not come under the LRS limit. The reason here being, if you go to either current account transactions or the capital account transactions, you can refer to the definition of drawal. Drawal is only for remittance. The TCS amount is not remitted abroad. The TCS amount actually goes into the government coffers. So let's move on to the contravention under ECB. So here I have combined two particular compounding orders. I have combined them because both contain similar facts. So under both these cases, so one is of Mr. Arun Mamen. Arun Mamen is the managing director of MRF Limited. And so, by the way, all these facts are there in the compounding order. I am not supplementing any facts on my own. And Mr. Arvind Singh Mewar. So he's an ex prince of one of the Rajasthan area. Okay, so under both these cases, the applicants being resident individuals, they had opened foreign currency accounts outside India. So Mr. Arun Mamen had opened under from the foreign exchange earnings, and Mr. Arvind Singh Mewar, he had opened under the LRS by making remittance. Mr. Arun, okay, so out of these foreign exchange accounts, they had lent money to persons outside India. So Mr. Arun Mamen had lent money to an individual in Mauritius, whereas Mr. Arvind Singh Mewar had lent money to a UK company. What are the contraventions here? In case of Arun Mamen, Regulation 3 was invoked, whereas in case of Arvind Singh Mewar, Regulation 5(1) was invoked. Now, what is the difference between both these regulations? So, Regulation 5(1). So, Regulation 5(1), this is of Notification 3, but you will find a corresponding provision under Notification 3R also. So, there is a schedule there for lending by in foreign exchange by persons resident in India. So this similar provision is appearing as on today also. So what did this erstwhile regulation 5.1 deal with? Regulation 5.1 dealt with transactions wherein an Indian company can actually lend money only to its overseas JV or WS. An individual was not listed there, and since this person meaning Mr. Arvind Singh Mewar had actually lent money to a UK company wherein he was a director, that regulation was invoked. Whereas in case of Mr. Arun Maman, it was a normal transaction of a resident individual granting a loan to a non-resident individual. So therefore, regulation 3 was invoked there. So therefore, we have covered the interplay between regulation 3 and regulation 5.1. Mind you, even when now an individual incorporates a company outside India, they can put in money, that is make financial commitment only by way of equity investment. They are not allowed to lend any money. So giving a practical experience here. So a lot of times we get queries from the clients stating that once you have put in money into a LRS bank account, then RBI should not be concerned however we are using that funds. That is not the case. There is a section 10(6) which we have earlier dealt with also, which states that you have to use the funds which you have remitted into the LRS bank account only for the specific purposes, that is the specific current account and capital account. So capital account permitted purposes and the current account permitted purposes. It is not that once you remit funds abroad, you can just forget about it and not see the end use or track the end use. There is no tracking mechanism as on today from RBI's end. That does not mean that section 10(6) can be ignored left, right and center. Let's go to the next compounding order. So this is a compounding order of deemed ECB. So here the applicant, that is Cisco Systems India Private Limited, that was held jointly by a Netherlands company, a Mauritius company and a Denmark company. The Indian company had entered into certain transactions with the group companies. And so what were those transactions? Those are certain intercompany transactions and service transactions per se. And there was the total amount was, I think, 384 crore. The amount remained outstanding beyond the stipulated time period. And after that, I think the outstanding was cleared. Now, what is the concept of deemed ECB and what are its origins? So if you see the master direction on import, so that master direction on import covers the import of services as well as import of goods. Now there you have to settle a particular outstanding for import within a period of 6 months. For certain in between COVID period that was extended. So if you are not able to make the remittance within 6 months, you have to go to RBI, seek clarification, seek extension, and you have to go to the AD bank, seek extension, and the AD bank has a power to grant you extension for a block period of 6 months. Maximum extension that can be given is only for a period of 3 years. So that is how this benchmark period of 3 years comes into play. And once the period of 3 years is crossed, the character changes from a current account transaction into a capital account transaction. And thereafter it is treated as a deemed ECB. So that is the concept of deemed ECB. Now, in a lot of deemed ECB cases, you will wonder that why in some cases, in some ECB cases, undue gains have been levied. In some ECB cases, undue gains have not been levied. So we have been able to find a pattern in these ECB cases. So in the ECB cases where actual interest has been paid, in those cases RBI has not levied undue gains, whereas in those cases where interest has not been paid, so it may be interest free loan, it may be a case of deemed DCV. In those cases, RBI has not levied undue gains. Now, this could be for the reasons best known to RBI, because, so in our opinion, whenever you are actually making payment of interest, it entails outgo of foreign exchange for a transaction which was not permitted in the first place. So therefore, in those cases, in fact, undue gain should have been levied rather than in the other cases where interest has not been paid, or in case of deemed DCV. If there are any questions, I can take a pause here and address them, or else we can actually proceed.
I think someone has raised hand. I'll just mute
Yes,
a couple of
yes.
people. Yeah, Miss Vanna, you can please speak. Miss Vanna?
Neeraj, if you want,
Huh?
we can unmute all the participants and they can interrupt me anytime they want.
Hello.
Oh, okay, I'll do that.
Hello.
Yes,
Yeah.
Miss Vandana.
Yeah, so I have just one query. Like, if there is only wrong reporting of purpose code for exports, so whether still, someone needs to go for compounding?
If you don't obviously correct it, then yes.
No, so
Because that is what gets recorded in the systems, right?
sorry,
Sorry?
I missed you.
Yeah. So if you have written the wrong purpose code, then that is what has been given and that is what gets coded into the system, and therefore unless you correct it, that is a contravention on your part.
Yeah, so the option for in that case is just I need to approach the AD bank to correct the purpose codes, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Thanks.
And that also within a reasonable period of time. Because if
Understood.
you approach after an unreasonable period of time, the AD may not want to do that without seeking RBI approval.
Understood. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Harsh, next is Neshar Shah.
Yes. Yes, Naisar. So in fact, Naisar is my colleague, and he has helped me for making the presentation. Hello.
No, I don't have any query. Thanks.
Okay. So I think there is a query in Q&A. What is the premise of undue gains for interest-free loans? Are there cases where this is seen? Yes. So this is exactly what I told, that in case of interest-free loans, undue gains have been levied, whereas in case of in cases where interest has actually been paid, in those cases, undue gains have not been levied. So it's a very peculiar dichotomy which is there. I hope I have answered your question. Bharat?
She's on mute.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Next is Miss Rachna.
Yes.
Miss Rachna. Okay. Harsh, I'm unmuting everyone for them.
I think that's better, no? So they
Yeah.
can
Correct.
ask the questions whenever they want.
Absolutely.
Miss Rachna, are you able to unmute yourself? I think she's not able to ask her query. Probably you can come back later. That's okay.
Correct. I've unmuted
Okay.
everyone. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Now let's go to the next compounding order. So that is in case of Mr. Dharampal Agarwal. So he has made a joint investment with other family members who have been listed here. So what these individuals have done? So these individuals have jointly acquired a residential property in Singapore, the cost has been given here, that is roughly 3 million Singapore dollars. A part of that cost was met by way of remittances under LRS, whereas the other part of the cost was met by availing a loan from a foreign bank, that is OCBC Bank. The OCBC Bank is a Chinese bank, but from the Singapore branch maybe. So the overseas residential property was acquired partly from LRS funds, partly from the loan funds. When the applicant actually went for compounding, they had submitted certain emails justifying, not maybe justifying the stand, but stating certain facts. So there are 3 facts which have been given here. One, that the installments for repayment of the loan and EMI were met out of the proceeds of lease rental of that property. Second, that during I think initial years the interest component was large and the principal component was small, and they ended up effectively repaying more than the amount of the loan that they had taken. But I'm not sure why they have stated this, because in all EMI transactions that is how it is going to be. And the third fact that they have stated is that they have not made any gains by availing the overseas loan for the property abroad, and the reason effectively is that they have repaid more than the loan that they had taken. Later on, they sold on the property and repaid the entire loan proceeds. Okay, so here this is a contravention of regulation 3 of FEMA notification 3. So this is the ECB transaction. So a resident individual is not allowed to take a loan from outside India, and be it for acquisition of property or be it for any other transaction. So they are not allowed to take a loan except from certain individuals who may be your relatives, the OCI or card holders or NRI relatives, and the relative definition as per Companies Act. Except under those circumstances, individuals are not allowed to take loan. So therefore, this is the contravention which is there. Now coming to the concept of applicant. So if one refers to section 13, which we mentioned earlier, who is an applicant? Applicant is one who has actually contravened a particular provision. So here, in fact, since the property was jointly held in all persons' name, all persons had remitted and all were joint applicants. But in this case, I think for the ease of reference, only one individual has filed a compounding application, that is Mr. Dharampal Agarwal. So otherwise, you would see, in cases where amalgamation has happened and the company, or maybe, liquidation has happened, the amalgamated company becomes the applicant rather than the amalgamating company. And the amalgamated company pays compounding fees on behalf of the erstwhile amalgamating company. Similarly, in case of companies going in for liquidation, the official liquidator also, we have seen in some cases, they act as the applicant on behalf of the company. Now, one pertinent and important question here is that, so this is also related to FEMA 3 itself. What if you are making remittance under LRS for purchasing property on an installment basis? So you have actually not borrowed from outside India, but you have signed a particular purchase deed wherein you have to make payments over a period of time in multiple installments. So what happens in those cases? Are those transactions actually allowed? Are those transactions not allowed? So I will give you my view. I would also invite views from others. There is no concrete view which RBI has given here, but my view is that once you are actually committing to make a particular remittance in the future, that may amount to undertaking a contingent liability. Contingent meaning that if you sell off the under construction property, then there is no liability per se which is fixed upon you. And if you go ahead with making the payments for the property acquisition, then in those cases the liability would devolve upon you. So it is contingent on whether you want to hold the property or not. So in my view, since it would amount to undertaking a contingent liability, in that case it may not be allowed from RBI's perspective, because it is undertaking a liability which is a capital account transaction. So I would invite views from the participants, what are their views, and if they have come across any adverse action that has taken place in case of acquisition of immune property outside India on an installment basis. Would anyone like to share? I think let's go ahead. Okay. Now this contravention. Yeah. So coming to the next contravention. Yeah. Does someone want to ask a question?
हेलो हाँ क्या हुआ भाई अपना
Yeah, Harshal, please continue.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this compounding order deals with the erstwhile notification 4. So that notification was basically rupee borrowing. So earlier there were two notifications, notification 3, notification 4. 3 dealt with forex borrowing, 4 dealt with rupee borrowing. Now both have been merged into 3R. So, but parallel provisions which have been cited here, so those are not appearing in 3R, but there is a poser which I want to discuss, and that is why I have selected this compounding order. So a lot of times you get queries from companies that I have a NRI director, and can I actually take a loan from them on a short-term basis? So that is what has exactly happened here. So the applicant, being the company, they had granted as well as availed interest-free loan from their NRI director. So I don't think it is necessary to go into this provision, because this provision has no longer a corresponding provision in 3R. But one thing that I want to discuss here is that as on today, if someone comes to you and asks whether even as on today, NRI director wants to place a deposit or wants to give a loan to the Indian company, is that even possible? So under FEMA notification 3R, an Indian company is only allowed to borrow from even individuals if they are foreign equity holders. So if the NRI is only a director without any shareholding, so say probably a independent director, then in that case they are not allowed to take avail loan from them. But there is another route also. If the NRI has certain deposits which have been placed in NR account in India, then in that case he can actually place a deposit with the Indian company, provided that those deposits would not have coming from foreign remittance, and they would have been accumulated over the years out of the earnings in India. So this is something that I wanted to discuss here. And here again the question of undue gains. So even under rupee borrowing compounding cases, RBI still follows the same position which it follows under the forex borrowing, that if there is an interest-free loan, then in those cases it has actually levied undue gains. In cases where interest has been paid, it has not. But in this particular case, it had not levied undue gains, and I'm not sure of the reasons why it had not. Let's go to the next compounding order. So this is also a very practical situation where a lot of us come across. So whenever a person becomes NRI, he has to immediately recharacterize his resident savings bank account into NRI accounts. Then additionally, he may open NRI account, he may open FCNR account, and so on. So what has happened in this particular case? There is one individual, Mr. Gaurav Bamania. He has purchased certain shares, made investment in certain shares of an Indian company which is Edu Network Private Limited. So this person, being an NRI, has done that. but he has actually made the payment for the consideration from the resident bank account. So the contravention here is that, so there are multiple contraventions here. One is, if you see from the individual's perspective, there are two contraventions. One is that he has not recharacterized the account from a resident to another account. Second, for making payment, he has used an account which was not permitted. So if you see schedule 4, so even as on today, obviously the regulations have changed, but there are corresponding regulations thereunder also. So if you, for example, take into account schedule 4 in the manner of the mode of payment and reporting of non-debt instruments, even under schedule 4 as on today, if you want to make a particular investment, the funds have to come from NRE account, FCNRB account, or NRO account, or from inward remittance. So there is a contravention on that count also, one under the inbound regulations, one under the deposit regulations. Whereas if you look at the contraventions that have been developed upon the company, there is one contravention, that is regulation 4 of FEMA 20. Regulation 4 of FEMA 20 talks about issue of shares in a non-permitted manner. So non-permitted manner here because the payment has not come from the specified sources. Now there are certain posers here. One poser is that, RBI has actually taken the contravention from the date of investment and not from the date on which he became a non-resident. So therefore, my question here is, should the contravention start from the date he became a non-resident, or should it only start from the date he made an investment? My view is that it should have started from the date he became non-resident, because the recharacterization of the account from resident savings bank account to NRO account, the obligation to do that starts from the date he becomes a non-resident. So practically, people, so professionals, even AD banks take a view that the permissible debits and credits are almost similar in case of resident savings bank account and NRO account. And therefore, they being a non-residents and the amounts being small, they tend to not refer the matter to RBI in for compounding. Now, second question here is, so we have listed two contraventions here under different notifications. One is under the deposit notification, one is under the inbound notification. Whether for the same transaction is one, he has made an investment from a resident savings bank account for purchase of shares of a Indian company. One transaction, but there are two contraventions, one under deposit account and one under the inbound regulations. Is it permissible to levy more than, levy compounding fee more than once for the same transaction? So the answer is yes, you can do that. Take for example a very simple case of disinvestment. If you look at disinvestment regulations, I will cover those in the next session itself, but anyway, there is regulation 16 which gives you different conditions for disinvestment. One is non-adherence to valuation. Second is certain outstanding payments are due, and so and so, or the Indian parties under investigation. Transaction is one, transaction is only disinvestment, but on different counts, if there are contraventions, they are to be treated as separate contraventions and not only one contravention, because transaction is one. Similarly here, one contravention is non-recharacterization of the resident savings bank account into the NR account, and second contravention is making investment from a resident savings bank account which was not permitted under schedule 4. So if you look at it from that perspective, there are in all two contraventions per se. Now what has happened is, the individual has been contravened under two regulations. Now for the same offense, even Edu Network has been penalized, and Edu Network has been penalized once under Regulation 4 and once under Schedule 4 of Para 3 of Schedule 4. So I can at least understand that Para 3 of Schedule 4 are common, but Regulation 4 is different now. So Regulation 4, from the company's perspective, company was not allowed to issue the shares since the mode of payment was not adhered to by the particular shareholder. So you will find a lot of cases wherein, for a particular transaction, under the same regulation itself, multiple parties have also been compounded and multiple regulations have also been brought out for the compound person. Let's go to the next one. So this is an interesting one. So there was an individual here who was subject to I think I think it has not been mentioned yet, but he was subject to a raid or an investigation, whereunder it was found that he was holding foreign exchange in excess of $2,000, which is the normal limit which an resident individual is allowed to maintain. Yeah, so the applicant had undertaken official visits between so and so, but failed to surrender the forex in above the prescribed limit. Then DDIT conducted search and seizure action, and foreign currency in excess of $2,000 was found, and then it was inventorized. Then the matter was referred to ED, and subsequently the applicant had encashed the amount. So therefore, the unwinding had happened. So here there are two notifications which come into play. So I want to bring about the interaction between one, that is FEMA 9R, and second, that is FEMA 11. So as on 11R. So as on today also, if you refer to FEMA 9R, what does FEMA 9R talk about? FEMA 9R is realization, repatriation and surrender of foreign exchange. And FEMA 11R is talking about possession and retention of foreign currency. So while FEMA 9R talks about the number of days within which you have to surrender the foreign exchange, FEMA 11R talks about the limit. Now, both these regulations would always come in tandem. Let's take for an example that a particular individual had gone abroad and drawn forex up to the particular limit. After coming back, he has not deposited the excess forex within a period of 180 days, which is granted to him. Now, if the total amount of forex is below $2,000, then in that case he cannot be compounded under either 9R or under 11R. And if the total amount of forex exceeds $2,000, then both the regulations, both the notifications would get attracted, because he is holding about 2,000. So in the first place 11R is attracted, and after that, since he has not deposited within a period of 180 days, even 9R will get attracted. So therefore these two regulations, if they are getting attracted, they would get attracted always together or not. So it is mutually exclusive. Okay. So this is something that I wanted to bring out. Okay. Now let's go to the next order, which deals about foreign currency accounts. So under notification 10R, a resident individual is allowed to maintain foreign currency accounts for specified purposes only. Now here there was a situation wherein, so this is the same individual, but this is another compounding order. So he is, I think, the Prince of some Highness of Udaipur. So the applicant, during a visit in UK, he opened an account with HSBC UK and deposited on the spot, $5,000. And then there was a transfer which happened into this UK account from another account which was held prior to that. And during a period of November 2008 to October 2014, an amount of GBP 154,500 was remitted under LRS also. So there are three modes. One, during foreign travel, he opened the account and put in cash. Second, he transfers funds from some other foreign account. And third, he made remittance under LRS from India. So all these three funds were accumulated into the UK account. Now, additionally, he had rendered certain consulting services to a company, and he actually accepted the consultancy fees into that foreign account. So now there are four sources. So what is the contravention that has happened here? First contravention and the principal contravention is that if you are opening an account as a traveler, you are supposed to close down that account when you are coming back. You are not allowed to continue that account after coming back, except there is an exception which is there in case of a student. So if he has gone abroad and he has opened that account, and if he comes back and if he wants to continue that will be treated as an LRS account. But otherwise, if you are going as a traveler, then in that case you are supposed to close down that account. Yeah, okay. So my question here is that RBI has compounded him on this count. The principal contravention is that he had not closed down the account after he has come back. But in our view, there is another contravention which is coming here. If he is receiving a credit of the foreign consultancy fees into that account, is that even a valid credit? We would tend to believe that that is not a valid credit, because the account that you are opening there is only for a specified purpose. Why? For the purpose of travel. So only travel related payments or receipts can be made into that account. Even if it were to be treated as an independent LRS account, even for independent LRS accounts, only the related remittances and the credits related to them, debits related to them can be made from the LRS account. This income is totally unrelated to either the LRS account or the travel account which was opened, and therefore in our view there has to be an independent contravention, separate contravention on that count also, which has not been levied in this case. Okay, so I'll take a pause and we can take questions if there are any here.
Until now, there are no questions. If someone wants to speak, they can please unmute and speak themselves.
Yes. Okay. So we move on. Okay. So the next compounding order is also very significant, very important one. So a lot of times, you would receive queries from the clients. Can I set off import dues with export dues, be it goods, be it services? So this is a compounding order which deals with that. So there is an Indian company which is the applicant, SolarWinds India Private Limited. So they had set off import services payable against the export services payable, and both were to different group companies. So export receivable was from one group company, import service payable was to another group company, and then they set it off. Mind you, the period is 2009 to 2012. Now, as on today, if you ask, there is a provision of third-party payments and receipts under Master Direction on Export as well as on Master Direction on Imports, as well as Notification 23R, which is dealing with the export regulations. So, third-party settlement is allowed, provided certain conditions are met. So some of those conditions is that there has to be a tripartite agreement. If there is no tripartite agreement and if it's a good shipment, then in the bill of lading that party has to be mentioned. It has to be mentioned that payment has to be made to a third party. So all those facts have to be mentioned, and those documents should be available with the AD prior to undertaking the transaction. Now that particular provision has come in after this period. So in this order, the contravention has taken place on that count that that provision was not present. Even if that provision was not present, prior appeal of RBI was not taken for setting off these export receivables with the import dues. Third important point here is that if you look at the master direction on exports for goods, specifically if it is a same party, then subject to certain conditions, setting off is allowed. But when it comes to services, RBI has clarified that at a particular AD conference that that is not permissible. You have to specifically seek prior RBI approval if you want to go ahead with that. So here, one, the period was prior to introduction of this. Second, it was dealing with services. So therefore, this contravention is important on that count. Okay, let's go on to the next order. Yeah. So this is a compounding order. This is an interesting one. So under this compounding order facts, there were certain UK citizens. So Mr. Barry, Wendy, Miss Wendy, Mr. Derek, and Miss Catherine. All four individuals had jointly acquired a property in Goa. That is how it typically happens. You know, all foreign travelers come to Goa. They like the land, and then they make certain purchases. Now, at least there's a lot more awareness that that is not allowed. But in the past, you will find a lot of transactions where foreign citizens have actually acquired properties in Goa and in contravention to the norms. But here, one peculiar fact is that they had purchased a property way back in 1995. In 1995, that means FEMA had not come into effect. That was a FERA period, and they had actually jointly invested by putting in a sum of 10 lakh rupees. Now, after so many years, it may have come to the notice of RBI, or they may have wanted to sell it, and the AD bank may not have allowed them to sell it. After so many years, this transaction came to the notice, and RBI asked them to follow certain course of action. And this course of action you will find in most of the cases where this contravention has happened. One, they have to sell off the dispose of the property within 6 months. Second, the sale proceeds have to be deposited into NRO account. Third, they have to sell it off to a person resident in India. I think that has not been mentioned here, but that is also a common condition that RBI lists down. Fourth, when the sale consideration is put into NRO account, and after that the remittance or repatriation needs to happen, that will be subject to RBI approval. So all these conditions are very common. So all these four individuals sold the property after a period of almost 20 years for a consideration of 90 lakhs. Now what typically happens in immovable property transactions is that whenever there are undue gains are computed. So there are varying methodologies which RBI has followed in different orders. We have listed that down in a book also. I will be covering that in the next compounding order also. But if you see the guidance that RBI has given by way of a compounding matrix, and there is an annex to that. In that Excel sheet, you will see the last example. That example is pertaining to the immovable property. So whenever a particular applicant sells off the property, how to compute the undue gains, it has been given there. One, the amount of contravention is typically the amount that you would have put in. Okay? That is the investment amount, and that is very natural. Second, when you sell off the property, how do you compute the undue gains? So it is not simply sale consideration minus the cost that you would have put in, the cost of investment. So RBI typically should allow, as per that example, an allowance for opportunity cost also. So if you would have, instead of the immovable property where it was prohibited at that point in time, if you would have put in money in certain permitted instruments, say at that point in time FDI would have been allowed in particular company, you would have purchased the shares, or if you would have put in money in some other parallel situation. So RBI typically takes for allowing the opportunity cost the interest that applicant would have earned on long-term government securities. So that is the interest rate that RBI allows as a opportunity cost. It is some kind of indexation concept that RBI allows because on a fair basis. So what has happened in this case? In this case, we believe that since the offence was committed under FERA, first of all, RBI does not have the power to compound the FERA offences. That is very clear. But since the continued holding also comes under the purview of FEMA, RBI has compounded this case. So this is something that you will find in different situations. Second, since the offence was first committed under FERA, in that case, probably the guidance matrix may not apply because it is not a pure FEMA matrix. So that is what observation that we have had after analyzing the orders. So these FERA case orders, RBI has not applied the compounding matrix guidance, but instead it has levied 3 times the penalty. So that is coming from section 13 of FEMA Act, wherein 1 to 3 times of penalty can be levied for a particular contravention. So in this case also it has actually ignored the actual amount of undue gains and it has levied thrice the amount of purchase consideration as a compounding fee. So 10 lakhs was the purchase consideration and 30 lakhs is the compounding fee that has been levied on all 4 individuals. Now let's contrast that with another compounding order under FEMA 21. So what does this compounding order talk about? So here again there are French citizens, so non-OCI card holders, non-NRIs who have purchased a plot in Kerala in joint names. But here this is under FERA, this is under FEMA, this is not under FERA. Okay. And then they have subsequently built a residential building. So what is the total cost of investment that they have put in? For acquisition, it was 15 lakhs. For construction, it was 85 lakhs. So in total, they have put in a money of 1 CR into the plot of land and the building, construction of the building. Now, upon coming of the transaction to the notice, RBI again advised them that within 6 months you have to sell off the property to a person resident in India, similar to previous case also. So what they have done is they have sold off the property for 75 lakhs, and that is to an Indian company. Indian company can purchase Indian property, that is fair and square. After that, there are certain peculiar facts which I want to delve in greater detail. One, though they have sold off the property and they have received a total consideration of 75 lakhs, the independent valuation that they had done, the applicants themselves they have done, the value came to 84 lakhs 91,000, which is more. So they have indeed sold at a loss. One, loss to the fair value also, and loss to the amount that they had put in also. They had put in an amount of 1 CR, but they sold it at 75 lakhs, which is much below the cost. And after that, RBI independently obtained a valuation report. And it came to the notice of RBI that the third party valuer has actually valued the land and the property at a much higher value, that is 1 crore 28 lakhs. So there are different values here. One, cost of investment 1 CR, sale 75 lakhs, the value as fair value as per the applicants 84 lakhs 91,000, fair value as per RBI 1 crore 28 lakhs 75,000. So what should one consider here? So the principle remains the same. The amount of contravention is the amount that you would have put in, so that is 1 CR. Now coming to the question of undue gains. So ideally undue gains should take into account the actual sales consideration that the individuals have actually received. But in this case, what has happened is that RBI has ignored the amount or the value of 75 lakhs. It has ignored the amount of 84 lakhs also. It has actually taken into account its own fair value, its own notional fair value of 1 crore 28 lakhs 75,000. So therefore undue gains is 1 crore 28 lakhs 75,000 minus 1 crore. So 28 lakhs 75,000 is undue gains and contravention amount is 1 CR, and then the compounding fees as per the matrix on 1 CR. So the interesting fact here is that on a notional basis, RBI has levied undue gains when indeed the applicants have not earned undue gains in the first place. So this is something which is very specific to this case, and you will find a couple of compounding orders where RBI has taken this stand. Now another anomaly here is that, as we talked about, RBI typically allows opportunity cost allowance. In this case, it has not allowed that. So if the property was purchased in 2005, property was sold in 2017. Over a period of 10 years, the value of the property may have appreciated. So therefore, instead of investment in the property, if they would have invested in government securities, what would have been the value appreciation? At least that much allowance or indexation kind of thing should have been allowed. That has not been allowed in this case also. And in a couple of other compounding cases also, RBI has not allowed that. So I have selected this order for these reasons. So one, allowance for opportunity cost has not been given, though they have not earned any undue gain in reality. On a notional basis, RBI has levied undue gain on them. And this is also very peculiar, that the fair value which the applicants have assumed, RBI has ignored that, and on its own accord they have procured an independent valuation report. This is the only compounding order which we have come across in which RBI has done this. Okay. Now let's go to the next notification, which is LOBOPO. If anybody wants to ask questions, then I can address them right now also. So I think we can proceed. So I have selected two compounding orders in under the LOBO provisions, and I think thereafter there are another two compounding orders under the export regulations. So what does this compounding order entail? So here the applicant was a German company. Like all the applicants, it had got an approval to establish a branch office in India. Albeit, there are different terms conditions which RBI typically gives you under the while issuing the permission letter. Now, what did this German company do? Prior to the closure of the branch office in India, it sold off certain assets to a third party in India. And at what value? At 4 lakhs, which is different from the actual fair value. So the book value was 9,14,000 and it sold off at a loss. So the normal contravention is transfer of assets by a branch office. So earlier, RBI permission had to be taken. Now under 22R, if you see, it is under, AD can also approve those transactions. But typically, the sale has to take place to a group company. Here it has taken place to a third party. So there are certain questions which came to our mind. One is, what about the concept of what happens to the concept of undue gains? So have you purposely, so just like there is a concept of undue gains where you have earned something which was not allowed for you to earn, here have you purposely sold it at a loss? Is there any ulterior motive? And in that case, whether any financial so compounding fee should be levied on that count or not? And second, what if the assets would have been sold to a group company? In that case, whether RBI would have allowed you to do that at a loss? So I would invite views of the participants to both these questions. What is the approach? What approach should RBI have taken? Now, as all of you, I am also a learner here. We are also on a consistent basis. We have learned from the compounding orders, and we are sharing our thoughts. I would invite thoughts from others also.
Yes, Mr. Bharat, you can unmute and speak.
Harshal, now this concept of undue gains. So what's happened is in the financials, the assets are at 9 lakh, but they've been sold at 4 lakh. So now what's happening is even from an income tax standpoint, these guys haven't. They've said that tax they've incurred a capital loss and they've done away with it, right? So. Like the other scenario wherein you shared that the RBI had undertaken a valuation, wouldn't that be the right approach? But then, how far would you? But one thing, Harshal, which comes to my mind is, isn't a CA certification required on repatriation of proceeds? What did the CA do at that point in time?
So CA would only certify that whatever funds are arising, they are arising out of so and so transactions. CA certification is not required for transfer of assets by the branch to another party, and at what value.
Right.
So typically, if you see the regulations, I believe there it has been mentioned that it has to take place at book value.
Right.
So I am just trying to carry forward the concept of
Yes.
FEMA notification 21, wherein RBI did an independent valuation there.
With you there.
And
with you there.
Yes, and here it has not done that.
Yeah, it's not done that, surprisingly. These are peculiar circumstances, like you mentioned in the other case on undue gains for interest-free loans.
Yes.
Thanks, Harshal. I mean, I have nothing more to add. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Bharat. Okay, so let's move on to the next case. Okay, so this is also very interesting, and this is a very peculiar one. Everyone is aware about Pearson Education. So Pearson Education, I think they have a lot of education materials for professional as well as educational courses. So it had established a branch office in India. Obviously, after taking permission and that permission was given under the FERA regime. Now, after the branch ceased its activities, with effect from 1st October 2005, it continued to keep the funds in India. It had funds to the tune of 13 CR, and from 2013 to 2015, it put those funds in term deposit, and that also interest bearing with HSBC. So the branch ceased to carry on its activities. The facts of the compounding order do not state whether the branch has been closed down or not, but it says that it has ceased to carry on its activities. Second, it continued to carry funds in the bank account from 2005 to 2013 in the current account. From 2013 to 2015, it put those funds into interest-bearing term deposit. Now, RBI referred to a particular APDR asset, where it has been mentioned that BO can put in funds into a term deposit, provided the term does not exceed 6 months, and provided BO furnishes an undertaking that upon maturity those funds are again going to be used for my own India business. Okay. Now here what has happened is that the business has shut down. So therefore, the second condition which is there, that the BO furnishes an undertaking, that condition cannot be satisfied, and RBI has acknowledged that point, that since the branch has ceased its operations, we cannot ask for a undertaking that it has, upon maturity it will be used in the business, but it has certainly contravened the condition of 6 months. Now, very interesting question comes here, is that once the branch office has ceased its operations, ceased to carry on its operations, is it even allowed to continue maintaining funds in India? After completion of its operations, it has to dispose of all its assets. Then, and the funds in the bank account is one of the assets of the foreign company through its Indian branch. I am not really sure why RBI has not compounded that contravention per se. See, RBI has levied undue gains, that is okay because it has earned interest which it was not supposed to earn. So entire interest amount has been taken as undue gains, that has been neutralized net of tax, because it would have paid obviously income tax on the interest income that it have earned. But the moot point here is that whether it can even continue the bank account after cessation of its activities. So that is something that I wanted to bring about. If anyone has any insights, I would be happy to know them. Does anyone want to share their experience in this? Has anyone come across such a situation? So, unlike license office where the permission is to be renewed every 3 years, for branch office, it typically does not happen that way. Okay, if there are no inputs, then I can move ahead. Okay, so we come to the last two compounding orders. One is both are in case of export, but is this audible? Sorry, my Bluetooth went out of battery.
Yes, it's audible. I think two people have raised hands.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Paresh.
Yeah, Harshal, this deposit, most of the time what happens when you close a business, there are certain unsettled liabilities like tax liabilities. You are mostly on a leased premise, where also most of the places, most of these foreign branches were located in buildings in Nariman Point. And all these branches which were located in Nariman Point, there was a municipal tax dispute with the building where under the contract with the landlord, you had agreed that a municipal tax is a pass-through. And therefore, you are sometimes required to withhold back. This was in our case was with the bank, the bank had took 12 years to close because there was a tax liability.
Oh, okay.
Which went on, the dispute went right up to the tribunal, and even today at the tribunal, it last finally got settled after 14 years. So the bank closed its operation in 2008. The liability got settled in 2019.
Okay.
And the bank had continued to maintain the money which was got initially because the tax assessments were pending. Applications were made to RBI because this was a bank branch. To the banking division, it allowed it to continue to make deposits with another bank in India, which was foreign bank branch, which was operating in India, and almost for 12 years. Post that, actually, very surprisingly, there was no dispute in the period in which it operated as a branch. But the dispute started on closure, whether interest income is to be taxed on the interest article of the DTA or under the normal provision of business profits.
Correct. Yes, that controversy.
So they used to get the TDS deducted at 42%. Finally, the tribunals, we were arguing that because it was a branch from Singapore, it should be 10%. Yes. The department audit query came back, first time saying it is 42%.
Right.
Second time the audit query came, it is 15%. And finally, in 2019, that final order came from the tribunal accepting 10%. And 2 years appeals got dismissed on the ground that they were below the threshold value. Department appeals were dismissed.
Okay.
So NOC from the department itself took 8 years to remit money.
Okay.
Obviously, so this cases with branch will always arise, and it is unfair to tax away the case. Fortunately, RBI BOD did not even ask them to compound, so they never had a FEMA issue around.
Okay, okay, okay.
So practically, every branch which is closing may not necessarily able to close the account very next day. It will take few years before
Okay.
everything gets settled. Because in India, nothing happens on one day.
Yeah, correct, correct. I understand that. Yes.
And therefore, this whole whether this 13 crore was retained for any contingent liabilities or claims which were made, or was it a surplus money part? Was the surplus money being withheld because of a regulatory approval? All that has to be considered. I don't think anything of that has come out in the order. If I
Yes,
understand.
correct, correct. I agree with you, Paresh bhai. That if those are the facts, then I totally agree that the applicant should not be unduly burdened with or saddled with the compounding fees for.
Fortunately, nothing on FEMA front happened in that case. It was all income tax, and it was almost impossible to
Yes.
deal with the income tax matter itself. So last money would have gone out in 2018 for a 19 for a branch which closed in 2008.
Correct, correct. Yes. So a lot of times I think similar to how you said, if there are certain litigations which are still outstanding, you may also have to deposit certain funds with the court. So in those cases also, this argument may be taken that it is because of regulations that regulatory hurdles that I'm not able to take the money out, and therefore I'm keeping it here. So yes, yes. Thank you, Paresh bhai. Thank you for sharing your insight.
Hello.
Yes, Vandana. Yes.
Yeah. So just one case which I would like to discuss here in relation to project office is there is this is the project office of Singapore company, and the Singapore company was supposed to take some insurance in India for certain goods. So this project office, the funds didn't get remitted on time, and the due date for insurance company was getting expired. So they asked one resident Indian to just pay to the insurance company, and after 10 days, when the remittance and everything got sorted out, they paid back to the Indian resident from the project office account.
Hmm.
So whether this is like a loan to project office, which is an offense, or the practical considerations will be taken care by RBI.
Yeah, yeah. So, typically if there are reimbursement transactions, so I would tend to believe reimbursement transactions are allowed, because lot of times, what happens is even so yours was a case of project office, but whenever, foreign company wants to incorporate an Indian company, in those situations also, sometimes, pre-incorporation expenses are spent by the foreign company. Certain other payments are made by the foreign company on behalf of the Indian company. So in those cases, we typically take the stand that it's a current account transaction, because immediate square off is taking place. But yours is a reverse situation, where a resident Indian is making payment on behalf of a non-resident Indian.
Correct.
So if this ground of current account transaction is taken, if that plea is taken, then I believe that there should not be a particular contravention. But since your case actually falls under 22R. Under 22R, I believe all remittances have to come
Through
through.
project office account.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes. Yeah. So
Yes,
that
yes.
actually,
Irrespective of whether it's a current account transaction or not, because you're squaring it off reimbursement, I think FEMA 22R contravention will still remain.
correct.
Yes, yes.
That's my concern.
So at least you can come out of section 3B, that is for the person who's the resident individual who has made the payment. So section 3B states that save as otherwise provided so and so, no person shall make a payment to or for the credit of having any person resident outside India.
Correct.
Okay, sorry, but you said it's a branch in India, right?
Project
Not for a
office.
foreign company.
No, project office.
Sorry, project office in India.
Yes.
Okay. So then project office is anyway considered as a person resident in India only. So person resident in India, an office, branch or agency in India owned or controlled by a person resident in India. So it is in effect one person resident in India making payment on behalf of another person resident in India. So section 3 will not come into play, but FEMA 22R contravention, I would tend to believe that will remain.
Okay, understood. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So let's go to the last two orders. So the first order is that the applicant had made certain payments to one entity, but the payment came from the associate company of the importer. Upon realization, the bank cancelled the EBRCs related to that. After they were issued, they received a letter from a Commissioner of Customs. Now, thereafter, what happened is that the applicant had incurred huge losses. The operations were discontinued, and subsequently it went into liquidation. And the order was also passed by Punjab Haryana High Court in 2019. So there was an offence, there was a contravention, no doubt about it. But in this case, even if one were to unwind the transaction, it would not have been possible because there were no funds left. Taking that into account, RBI actually gave a post facto approval stating that the administrative action has been completed. Okay. So certain observations here. Here again, I think we come back to the same regulation. Third party payments, they have been permitted since 2013, but since this transaction was during the period June 13 to September 13, that fell out of the purview of this. If that would have been the case, probably one may have been able to come out of the contravention, provided obviously these conditions would have been met. One important observation here is that we have come across certain compounding orders wherein in contravention, if it were happening on account of impermissibility of action also, in those cases also RBI has actually levied penalty. So in this case, I see compounding fee. In this case, I think RBI has been kind enough that if you are unable to actually remit the money since the company has only been shut down, then in that case, it has given post facto approval. Now coming to the last compounding order. So this is also a very peculiar one. So there is a proprietary concern in India of an individual. It had sent certain samples to the overseas buyer, and based upon that, it had received an export advance of a certain amount. Now, after receiving the export advance was used for manufacturing the goods, and after manufacturing the goods were ready for dispatch. But from the buyer side, the buyer was located into Nigeria. There were certain glitches in importing the goods because I think a certain form F was not available with the buyer. So therefore that import could not happen. Then the importer demanded refund of the advance. Then this Indian entity, they claim that the money has already gone into manufacturing of the goods, and now so even if the refund is to be made, that cannot be made, and at the max the goods that are ready to be shipped, that can be scrapped and the scrap value can be given. So in this case, RBI has actually penalized the Indian concern, that is the proprietary concern, for not being able to fulfill the export obligation within 1 year of receipt of the advance payment. So as we saw, impermissibility of action may not be a reason for RBI to let you off from the compounding of the contravention and imposition of compounding fee. In this case also, it was not in the hands of the Indian concern. Proprietary concern was ready to ship, but the buyer was not able to accept the shipment. And even after these peculiar facts, RBI has actually levied compounding fee on this individual through or his property concern. So I think this is what I wanted to bring out. And yeah, I think it is a close of the session for today. And in the next session, I would be covering a whole lot of orders only on FDI and ODI.